Nobody knows the system better than me. Which is why I alone can fix it.
Those words, now the title of the revealing tell-all book documenting the final year of the administration of Donald Trump. 2 months after Biden was sworn into office, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporters Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig sat down for an hours-long interview with the 45th president at his understated Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. Among several alarming admissions in their new book, I Alone Can Fix It, they write this, and we quote, Trump regrets his response to protests last summer in Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, and other cities. Quote, I think if I had to do it over again, I would have brought in the military immediately, he said. Remaining with us is our friend Philip Rucker. Joining our conversation is another friend of ours, his Washington Post colleague, Carol Leonnig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. As we mentioned, the pair have written yet another book, a new one on the Trump presidency, I Alone Can Fix It, Donald J. Trump's Catastrophic Final Year, which comes out tomorrow, wherever fine books are sold. Well, good evening to you both, and congratulations for the smattering of advanced reviews that I read this afternoon and tonight. Carol, tell us more about the last thing we raised here, Trump's regret over not calling out the military following the murder of George Floyd during the BLM protests, and a subset of that question, who was going to tell him if he wanted the 2nd Marines or the 82nd or the 101st to take positions in the city of Seattle?
Wow, Brian, that's a two-part question that's important. Let me deal with the first part first. You know, because you've covered this administration and chronicled it very well every night at 11 o'clock, that the former president, rarely regrets anything. And in fact, in our interview with Donald Trump, Phil and I learned that he really doesn't regret anything about 2020, except for one thing. Though it was one of the most catastrophic years we've seen in our history, his big regret is that he didn't unleash active duty military troops on the people who were exercising their First Amendment rights to protest the death of George Floyd and the chronic, systemic, racist system in which many black men and women have been killed at the hands of police. That was his big sadness. Now, for your second part of your question, what we learned and what was so chilling to us was that many insiders in the Trump administration felt very strongly that they had to basically band together to keep Donald Trump from sicking active duty troops on Americans in all sorts of cities: Seattle, Portland, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York. It felt so frequent a demand and a request from the president that Bill Barr told aides he was tired of going to the White House because he knew what the conversation was going to be. Let's send troops in. The president wanted to burnish his image and look like a tough law and order guy because he wanted to win re-election. And all of those people inside the administration saw right through that, and they worked to stop him.
Of course, they made up for a lot of that in Lafayette Park alone. Phil, as I read it, your scheduled interview at Mar-a-Lago was for an hour. It went for 2.5 or thereabouts. For people who will never get that distinct pleasure of sitting down for that long, A, what's it like? B, what shocked you the most during that conversation?
Well, Brian, it was an entirely bizarre scene for Carol and me. We came to the interview and Trump wanted to hold it in what is effectively the lobby of Mar-a-Lago at the dinner hour. So scores of his dinner guests were parading past us as we were trying to interview him about the serious substantive matters of his presidency. But He is so fixated on the 2020 election. He kept reverting back again and again and again to the election and to the conspiracies that we all know are not true. The falsehoods that he won Arizona, the falsehoods that there was fraud in Fulton County, Georgia. But in Trump's mind, it's so real. And he would tell it to us with the real sort of animated cadence. He thought people were going to finally figure out. He kept saying, I'm trying to get the word out here about the election fraud that simply doesn't exist. So what you have at Mar-a-Lago, or what you had on the day we were there at the end of March, is a king of Republican politics, sort of in his brigadoon, with an imagined reality all around him that just doesn't stack up to the facts or anything else. And by the way, he's also filled with grievance. He brought up again and again people like Bill Barr, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House. He even invoked the late Senator John McCain. All people that he made fun of, he said were unintelligent. He blamed them for things that had gone wrong. And he also blamed Mike Pence, his loyal vice president, for not doing what Trump considered to be the courageous thing on January 6th by trying to overturn those election results. The former president, still bitter about that.
Carol, back to the subject of the military and Donald Trump. And had this been a full-on third world style coup, it is plausible that he would have wanted to call out the military to enforce whatever his election goals were. Tell us what leaders at the Pentagon were willing to do in the event of such an order.
There were so many things that very senior military officers and officials were in a near panic about and feared that Donald Trump would do, things they felt he would do to basically maintain his grasp on power. And that had been a feeling that had been growing for months. It did start actually June 1 for General Mark Milley. He believed the president would really show no remorse, no regret, not be worried about breaking any laws in order to deploy the military for his own political gain. And what the Joint Chiefs all agreed was that they would start planning for how to block Donald Trump's worst impulses, ones in which he might try to create chaos and fear, again, to keep power, or indeed engage in a coup. What they wanted to do was basically stop him from using the military, and they decided that maybe they would have to resign one by one. In essence, a reverse Saturday Night Massacre to stop the president. And they were talking about this privately as something that really could happen. And they were quite glad when Inauguration Day came that they had not had to use that secret plot.
Welcome back. Two of the three people on the screen right now are Pulitzer Prize recipients who have indeed just authored their second book on our past president, Philip Rucker, Carol Leonnig, our guest tonight. And Carol, this one's for you. This is about a scene in the book where the Secretary of Defense, Esper, learns from the general in charge of Operation Warp Speed that the vaccines are coming along. And here's how you guys write it. Esper was initially delighted when General Perna told him he was authorizing contracts to produce two promising vaccines. But the Secretary's ebullience then turned to concern. If the president learned they had millions of doses produced, would he or a White House advisor start demanding they administer them to the public before the vaccine had been fully vetted by the FDA? Carol, this dovetails with the reporting in this book that the president's concern over the coming pandemic was more about polling than public health. And it's clear the people around him were concerned about that.
You know, everything with Donald Trump, especially so in 2020, is seen through the lens of how it benefits him. And in the year 2020, many of those insiders got kind of too close a shocking look at just what that meant. A callousness towards the lives of Americans, a focus on burnishing his own image for the re-election to make sure the polls were good. How am I doing in the numbers? Those were his priorities. And in this moment that you describe, It was stunning to learn that the Secretary of Defense, upon finding that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, upon hearing that they are looking at vaccines with an 80% effectiveness rating, his reaction is first happiness and then panic. What if Donald Trump finds out? And what will he do? What will the White House do? What will Trump's closest aides want? What will the president want? Well, they all know what the president wants. He wants a vaccine before the election because he wants to have delivered on that promise and he wants to get reelected. But actually, Esper is worried that the president may order people to get the vaccine before it is properly vetted, before it's safe, and before the trials are completed. And he starts wondering if they should try to hide this light under a bushel basket.
Phil, talk about the call that Mike Pence made on 1/6 over to the Pentagon, which, according to the body of reporting on that day, is one call more than Donald Trump placed on the subject.
That's exactly right, Brian. This was a moment of national crisis. The Capitol was under siege by violent rioters, and you would expect the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, to be active, to be calling the Pentagon, to be trying to get control of the situation. But our behind-the-scenes reporting in this book shows that President Trump spent those hours in front of a television set, watching what was unfolding at the Capitol, and essentially paralyzed from doing his duty as the Commander-in-Chief. Instead, you had Vice President Pence, who was in a hideaway, effectively. He was under threat physically at the Capitol. His family was in danger. People were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," all around him. And it was Vice President Pence who was calling the Pentagon, who was saying, get these troops here now, get this building under secure, get this building cleared out of these rioters. And importantly, he refused to be evacuated from the Capitol because the vice president thought it was essential for the American people that he remain in the Capitol to do his job, to certify the election whenever the Senate and the House could reconvene. It's a chilling bit of reporting, and it just speaks to how little President Trump did in that moment. He effectively melted away.
Carol, let me ask you a final question about process. There are so many people floating around Washington who want a little dose of hagiography, who want a chance to get the stink of having worked for Trump off their otherwise stellar resumes. And some of them are vaunted people, Esper, Barr, Milley, Pence, for that matter, Ivanka and Jared. So an author comes along, and how do you guard against becoming their resume burnishing tool in the scope of a massive project you two are involved in?
I'm really glad you asked that question, Brian, and I'm really glad you used the word guard, because that's exactly how Phil and I felt in these moments, in these interviews. Sometimes we sat with people for 7 hours at a time, and we were on guard for people wanting to make everything a little more gossamer about how they handled a situation, make themselves look a little more brave, or perhaps a little more resolute. And in fact, I think we all know what the standards for serious journalists are, but I'll repeat them here. We don't have anything in our book that we couldn't corroborate independently. Every time that it was possible, we asked our sources for additional people who knew this information, or we sought out those as well. We asked our sources for calendar entries and text messages. I mean, we're pretty pushy and nosy, and they showed them to us to help, again, make sure that what they were alleging is something that we could take to the bank. And if we could not find that kind of information, if we could not find trust in what they were alleging, we didn't publish it. Now, I want to say there's another reverse element to this, and that is people who want to be associated with Donald Trump for their political benefit. They want to tap into the political base of Donald Trump. Some of those people were running from us as well because they had raised serious questions about Donald Trump's ability to lead, about the insanity of some of the things that happened in the final month of the presidency, and in fact confided to people that they were quite afraid of what Donald Trump would do. And they've tried to deny those things to us, and we've corroborated them, but they've tried to avoid being critical of the president because it's important to them politically to be aligned with him.